welcome to History in Lowell. I'm Maritza Grooms. I'm joined by my personal professor, Bob Forrant. And we have a special guest here with us back in the studio after a couple of years, Emma Tobin, Chief Program Officer of the International Institute of New England. Welcome back, Emma.
Thank you for having me. Always lovely to be here.
And we're here because after 20 years, the U.S. decided to withdraw from Afghanistan. And that actually impacts Lowell a little bit. So let's just dive right in. So Bob, do you want to maybe talk a little bit about why we're withdrawing from Afghanistan? I don't know if we can do that
in 38 seconds. I mean, incredibly complicated history that when I think about it, when I teach it, I say it replicates many of the same mistakes we made in Southeast Asia. We thought we could go into a place that we knew almost nothing about and make it over in our image. And that just doesn't end well. It hasn't ended well wherever we've tried to do this since the early 1940s. And this is another example where we've poured massive amounts of money. We've disrupted the lives of millions of people. We've created a mass exodus out of parts of Iraq and Afghanistan, and those refugees have tumbled over into bordering countries to be sheltered and taken care of. And we got to the point where I think somebody finally woke up and realized, this is not going to end well. Whenever it ends, it's not going to end well. And so it's just time to go. And I was struck by the final thing I'll say on the bigger history. I was struck by the similarities at the time of images from Vietnam. When we were exiting Vietnam, there were a lot of really famous photographs of people trying to get out who are at the U.S. Embassy, and they're clambering at the U.S. Embassy to get on the last helicopter. And you can see people climbing ladders onto the roof of the embassy to try to cling to these helicopters as they take off, because people are fearful what's going to happen when the U.S. pulls out. And the scenes in the airport in Afghanistan were really quite similar, where people were running along beside the plane, hanging on to, desperate for something. And what bothered me, I think, in both cases, but what really bothered me in this one is we knew this was coming. And we actually failed, I think, to do much of anything at all to try to figure out what the humanitarian consequences of this would be, and how we would put things in place to make it as least painful as possible. I almost feel like we ended up doing it in a way that made it the worst. And to me, it ended up being the worst possible way. And so it's really. Again, taking the long view in history, we don't learn from history. My students are always asking me that. How come we did this again? And I say, well, I can't help you. I don't know. I'm just a historian. Like human psychology and whatever, I have no way of understanding. But the similarities between what happened in Southeast Asia and what's happening now in Afghanistan, which will trickle over into Iraq, into other neighboring countries, it's just going to be disruptive all over again. We've essentially failed. So I guess the good news, in a way, is at least there's some movement on the Biden administration's part to allow certain numbers of people into the country to sort of jump the line, right? In a way, sort of go around a process, which I guess for you all has to be a tricky thing too. Like, how do you navigate that, right?
It is a very tricky thing. So, refugees arrive through something that the federal government calls the Reception and Placement Program, RNP, and they have actually built an entirely new program which has almost all of the exact same policies and rules for Afghans, and it's called the Afghan Placement and Assistance Program. And it follows the same timelines and guidance, but it's like a parallel resettlement program.
Oh, wow. Wow. So, to summarize, U.S. involvement in foreign affairs creates a humanitarian crisis, and all of these people, tens of thousands right now, are displaced. But the good news is we have the International Institute at least resettling 150 of those folks, right?
So the International Institute of New England has 3 offices, and between the 3 offices, we are going to resettle 425 Afghans. We announced some numbers early on in the process that have since gone up, and that is because a very important thing happened. Congress took action to make Afghan evacuees eligible for refugee benefits and services. And what that means is they created this APA program that I referenced before, where there's a pathway for them to arrive, there's certain types of cash assistance they can access, they can enroll in, all the public benefits programs refugees enroll in. And so that really changed the game for us. And so we were able to raise those numbers. And now we're preparing to welcome 425 people, but 20 of them have already arrived. So 405, I guess.
Wow, that is really incredible that those numbers went up and that you're able to do all of that incredible work. And here, they could resettle anywhere in the U.S., but why Lowell?
Yeah, and to be clear, not all 425 people are coming to Lowell. Maybe about 200 people will come
some people out there in
greater
viewer
Lowell
land
area.
would be going
200,
bonkers
200.
now. Yeah.
And probably not all to Lowell proper. I mean, when we say Lowell, we're talking about greater
Lowell.
So I forget what the original question was. I'm sorry.
Well, they could
Why
resettle
here?
anywhere,
Why
but
here?
right here, yes.
Yeah, so Lowell has really become kind of a destination of choice for Afghans. And our organization has been resettling Afghans since 2014. And between 2014 and the sort of start of the current crisis, we resettled nearly 350 Afghans, most of them in the city of Lowell. And so people with a certain immigration status, not to get too into the weeds, people who are special immigrant visa holders, these are folks who supported the U.S. military in either Iraq or Afghanistan, they have a lot of choice in where they resettle, more so than refugees. And many of them have chosen Lowell as the community where they want to live. And so many of the people who are arriving now are actually coming to rejoin family members who already live here.
Nice.
Which has to be pretty amazing to sort of be part of putting families back together again in that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly emotional. It's what we kind of all, it's the reason we kind of all do this work. It's really, really amazing to be a part of it. It's also complicated, right? People are in these complex families with all different, generations, and can they all live together? Or do they need multiple apartments? So it kind of increases the complexity of the resettlement, but of course it also is so beautiful and emotional.
Yeah, as families are.
Always.
Right?
Really complicated.
Irrespective of where they come from.
Right.
Yeah, I can't imagine sometimes living in the same building with all my siblings and extended family, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, in a way, it's sort of what you're describing is in some ways what we've talked about before in Lowell with immigration history, that a lot of times somebody will come and then eventually other people, the word will go out that, like say for Greek or Portuguese immigrants,
Right.
well, Lowell's a cool place.
Right.
And so you get you get the same kind of a thing where
Yep.
people, I mean, obviously totally different circumstance. I'm not trying to equate the two, but there's a certain element of that process in the history of how immigrant and refugee history in this country plays out. So
Yeah.
Lowell is certainly interesting.
Yeah, Lowell is standing out in that way for the Afghan community. People are telling each other. I mean, we're hearing from our Afghan colleagues and former clients that they're telling each other that Lowell is, this great place with, there's a university there, there's good jobs there. I think people are drawn to the idea that it's close to Boston, which is very appealing to some of the people who are arriving. Of course, Boston is very appealing to them too. We also operate in New Hampshire. Because there's not an existing Afghan community there, we're having a very hard time resettling anyone there because it's, the existence of a community easily builds on itself.
Mhm.
Starting something from brand new is much harder.
Yeah, and so when people come, if they go to your offices over on Jackson Street, they'll see other Afghans working in the office.
Yep,
and
they will. In
they'll-
fact, the staff
They'll see
who-
the clothing on the walls and all the things that I've seen when I've been over there, and so it's sort of like, oh, okay.
Yeah,
You-
probably their case manager will be from Afghanistan. So they'll feel like they're coming into sort of an existing community, that there are staff who have become professionals in that community that can help them navigate it. They can go and work in a company that probably employs other Afghans. So there's a lot that's been sort of paved for them.
Yeah. So
Not that it'll be easy.
it couldn't be, right? Like I already think about like just moving within the city. Sometimes it's just not even easy, just if you're already a Lowell resident. Imagine coming from this terrible situation, but also potentially being reunited with family, some assistance here and there, and then they have to get on their own feet after a while. So the International Institute is able to provide stipends, right? A little bit here and there, maybe some courses, some like job training opportunities,
Yep.
And then off into the world you go.
Yeah, I mean, we provide, really intensive case management in the early months of arrival, and then sort of somewhat less intensive case management within that first year of arrival. Some people, continue to need intensive support, and we have programs and services that allow us to provide that. But all of the support that we provide to refugees who are resettling, and in this case, these Afghan evacuees, is customized to that person and to that family. If someone shows up and they're ready to be, up and running and on their feet and getting back on their career path within 2 months, they don't need the same level of support as another family that's going through different kinds of struggles. So we're really trying to meet people where they are.
Are any of the families that are coming, people that are coming, are there young children in the
Yes.
in the group? So
Yeah.
what problems does that? I shouldn't call it problem. I don't want to call it. I don't want to call a kid a problem. Yeah, thank you. What challenges does that offer in terms of the way that you would work with younger people? Then I'm sure school becomes one of the really tricky issues.
Yeah, I mean, school is huge. Luckily, we work in cities and towns that have, really well-established English language learner programs and have all kinds of kids in the school system who are adjusting to the country or to the language. So we've been talking to, the Lowell public schools, to the public school districts of the other cities where we work to say, this is the community that's arriving, like, let's be prepared. We've been collaborating on things like, cultural orientation for parents and how can we best integrate these families into the school system. Because when a school system is ready to take in a community, it can really become an important, center for that community, I think, to connect to all kinds of resources, not just their child's education. So there's a lot of collaboration going on there. I think of the 20 people who've arrived so far, 13 of them have been children, and many of those have been younger than school age. So babies, toddlers, very, very, very small people arriving.
Small people with challenges.
Yeah, that might even work out a little bit better in the long run because they get to be immersed into the culture and
Yeah.
it might be easier for them later on. But balancing cultures, I feel, it might be difficult for folks coming from someplace else. I think about some of the folks that we've talked to, and when they first come and they arrive, I'm particularly thinking of our one friend, Gordon, and those kids, and what you're going to do, the cultural differences and the cultural shock. But when you're younger, you can, I hate to sound so American and say assimilate.
Integrate.
Yeah, integrate. Thank you. Much better. Yeah, I guess
You're
we're
also
struggling with
sounding old
language.
when you're referring to people. I'm starting to feel younger here because you're calling yourself old, but older people.
I do think one thing that I always keep in mind about most of the refugee kids that come through our program, it's not like they know their culture and then they get to know American culture. Many of them have been exposed to many cultures already. Maybe they've been in refugee camps that have multiple nationalities in it. Maybe their own family was mixed nationalities or mixed tribes. Many of them speak more than one language before they get here. So it's in some ways American culture, which I don't think is one thing, is just another one that they're exposed to. And so some of these kids are pretty, I don't know if worldly is the right word, but maybe it is, at least multilingual, just worldlier than I am.
Yeah, I mean, I have students who came younger and now are at the university, and they talk about we talked about the images they have of what they thought this place was going to be like before they got here. And a lot of it is, if they were, for a while in a refugee camp, they were watching like the Disney Channel or something,
Right.
and they think it's palm trees and it's always sunny and warm and everybody smiles and whatever, right? And then they get off the plane in Boston in January and it's like, wait, like this is not Disneyland.
Very cold here.
What's the deal, right? And so they do. I've had those interesting conversations in my class where we talk about what expectations. These are older, they're going to be maybe 10 or 12 when they're arriving, and now they're some of them are in my classes at the university, and so it's interesting to. They also have, to your point, a more worldly whatever. When we're talking about larger history, they have a better sense of the world. A lot of kids that grow up around here and never kind of quite leave to have a very sort of parochial view, if you will, of the world and of history. And they're, some of my students, the students that are sort of either from immigrant and or refugee recent arrivals, kind of look sometimes as if to say, like, well, you really don't know much. You act like you do, but you really don't.
The other piece of this is interesting is that the U.S. had a 20-year presence in Afghanistan. So some of the people that are arriving, U.S. culture is not new to them. They've been working with Americans, or they
Right.
knew Americans. I remember resettling someone who was, affiliated with the U.S. military. This was not through this current wave of resettlement. This was a few years ago. And at the time, we had a caseworker who was himself in the Army as well, Army Reserves, I think. And the two of them just hit it off so well because it was like, U.S. Army guys together. And I was like, oh, this is unexpected. I didn't realize this would happen. So for some of these folks, yeah, U.S. culture is not new. For some, it will be.
So if I understand the process, the big thing that's different with people who are arriving in this current group of people have, in a way, their pace to get here is really quickened. In other words, the normal sort of procedures that one would go through to end up, say, coming to Lowell or whatever, and when you would know they're coming to Logan, go get them. Right. I don't know if it's called Logan Airport anymore, but to me it's Logan. Okay. So this is different, right? So so for a lot of people, it's like a whirlwind. You're here and then you're here.
That's the word I've been using. Yeah, it is a complete whirlwind. So these people were evacuated from Afghanistan really rapidly and in the midst of violence and chaos. Many of them were brought to, Gulf states or European countries. They went through processing by the U.S. government in those places, and were then brought to the United States and have been living on military bases, 8 military bases throughout the country since then. And so that's very different from refugee resettlement too. I mean, refugees don't live on army bases. They resettle to a community. We pick them up at the airport. They go to their own apartment. So these people have kind of almost been in something like a refugee camp within the United States for the past weeks or even months. They're then traveling from those bases to their final destination, in this case, Lowell. So it's much more rapid. It's much more chaotic. I mean, I will be honest in saying that this program is not as strictly, it's as strictly administered, but there are more mistakes and bumps along the way than there are in regular refugee resettlement, because you can't ramp up this quickly. You can't move this fast and not make mistakes. So we picked up a gentleman at the airport today that we did not know was coming. No one told us. And he arrived with our information in his paperwork and let us know he was there. And we said, we're on our way. We're going to come get you. And he'll be in Lowell by this afternoon. But we didn't know about him.
Talk about rapid resettlement.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty jarring.
Wow.
But the good news is we're ready. We have apartments secured and furnished. We have staff ready to go. We have volunteers ready to go. All these things are set up, and that's the work we've been doing these past couple months. Of course, we still want to know about people before they arrive, but we're making it work.
Wow.
And some of that, again, is the legacy of, as you lay that out, that's the legacy of 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
That there is an infrastructure. I wonder, so are some of the people that are volunteering now, were they affected in some way by the International Institute prior? Do you know some of that?
Yeah, we definitely have some folks who received services as children from the International Institute who are now volunteering with us to resettle Afghans. We have members of the Khmer community, Portuguese community, who are helping in this, Jewish immigration, Greek immigrants, all folks who came to Lowell through different waves of immigration, who are now helping with this process. And
this sounds like a little research project.
It does. Yeah, absolutely. And I think you see that in our staffing too, right? I mean, our staff are from, Iraq and Afghanistan and Haiti and Uganda, and waves of immigrants who've come to this city who then say, that's the work I want to do, and I'm going to give back in that way. Professionally, though, it's their jobs, and they do an incredible job.
Which is really the way from doing the 100-year history that's Institute always staffed itself. You could look at the staff and you could tell by the staff which wave we were in.
Right. We're often one phase behind, right? So the staff are from the group that came before, and then there's a little bit of overlap, but I think that's what makes us so strong as an organization.
Do you show them the timeline so they understand what they're...
Well, it's set up in our office now. We've got not the timeline, but we've got some parts of our historic exhibit in there, and then we've got our timeline.
So
and our
they can see they can see where they fit, right?
Right.
So one of the terms I saw is that people people can be referred to as humanitarian parolees.
Well, you're going to ask me the hardest question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so I mean well, I'm asking only because like to me the word is jarring.
Yes.
And it seems like if people want to make a big deal out of it in a negative way, they can leave off the humanitarian part and just sort of say these are all parolees, and that already carries with it a bad weight in American society anyway, which it shouldn't,
Yep.
but it does. And
Yep.
so how do you deal with that vocabulary other than making sure you always make sure to say it's human, but still it's a weird juxtaposition.
Right. Well, as the two of you may have noticed, and maybe the people watching have noticed, I haven't said humanitarian parolee yet in this conversation. I've said evacuees, and I have been going out of my way to talk about Afghan evacuees, people evacuated from Afghanistan. But yes, they are entering this country as Afghan humanitarian parolees. And even the word Afghan is important because it's all part of this immigration status. There are other people who have received humanitarian parole in this country who aren't eligible for the same benefits and services as Afghan humanitarian parolees because of this act by Congress. So to be paroled into the country for humanitarian reasons means you've been granted access, entrance into the country. You are here documented. You are legally in the country. You are a documented person, but it's a temporary status, and it does not have a pathway to permanent residency or citizenship. And that's the major difference between being a humanitarian parolee and being a refugee. Refugees can get green cards within 1 year of arrival. They can become U.S. citizens within 5 years. Afghan humanitarian parolees don't have those pathways. And so unless there's some other act of Congress or by the president, they'll have to claim asylum in this country in order to stay here.
Which would then be the next legal step when people...
Yeah, but our hope and the advocacy that we're doing and that groups like us are doing is to try to avoid that, because asylum is time consuming and it's expensive. And of course, there are many other people who've already claimed asylum and are in that process. So we're not trying to displace them from that process. So our hope is that there's some act by the federal government that grants these people a status that has a pathway to citizenship.
Do you think that's likely, or?
I don't know, honestly.
What's the worst case scenario for folks who aren't able to?
I mean, I suppose if everybody does have to claim asylum, and those asylum claims take years and tens of thousands of dollars, or to $10,000 a person, as asylum claims often do, and some of them get denied, then we are going to have people in very bad situations. I don't anticipate that happening. I don't think any of us do, but if you're asking about worst case scenario, that could be it.
Yeah, wow. There's so much that goes into all of this, and there are things that sometimes as we're here talking about this, I'm like, why would they choose this language? And I remember taking a class in my linguistics programs about the jargon that the government uses to kind of like mess with the people. And in the climate that we're in, I just find that kind of linguistic choice to be really just disgusting.
I had an elected official, not from Lowell, and I won't say where from, who is very pro-immigration, say to me, okay, this is well and good, but what can I call these people that's not humanitarian parolee? Because I'm never saying that out loud to anyone. I mean, people who sort of see the benefit of immigration and stand in support of immigration don't love this term. I think it's just really important to emphasize there's nothing in it that implies or that means that these folks are criminals.
Right.
It just means they have been paroled, they've been granted entrance into the United States on humanitarian grounds, and that they have this temporary status.
But in the Globe and the New York Times and the newspapers I was reading today, to sort of get more background for speaking with you, that's basically the phraseology.
Yeah.
And it struck me as really, again, and sort of, I mean, in immigration history, I teach students about the Chinese Exclusion Act and about how you could come and work, but you could never become a citizen. You could come here and work for 10 years and then you had to leave. And sort of, again, all these structural ways that you keep people out, push people away. In Mexico, how we bring people in when we want the labor and then kick them out when we don't, and we're not very careful about who we round up and toss back across the border. And so this just, hopefully, in terms of your optimism in the work, and again, advocacy, I think that other people could do, and maybe we should talk about that a bit. Like, how do we push it in such a way that to get that get that weird phraseology changed, get that status changed,
Yeah.
so that people aren't forced into the intricacies of asylum and the expense of asylum. Are there things that people listening can do to sort of to push, or is it too soon, or?
Right now, the big sort of advocacy push is around states, both Massachusetts and New Hampshire, designating funding for this population. And the International Institute and other organizations are, working with our elected leaders to sort of try to make state funding available to resettle these folks, because they're arriving so rapidly that they do need additional resources, and we need additional resources as resettlement organizations in order to do this work and resettle folks in dignity. So that's the real push right now. The initial push, advocacy push, was around grant them access to refugee benefits. Now we're looking at the state level benefits. I think next up it's what's the long-term pathway to citizenship.
Because without the refugee benefits in the first place, then they wouldn't have had rent help or
Right. When we
anything at
initially
all.
said 150 people, that was without any public assistance. We were going to have to fundraise it all, essentially. And so when those refugee benefits kicked in, that's when we were able to say, okay, we'll take more people.
Thank goodness those benefits kicked in.
Thank goodness.
And hopefully we can get some more. And really quickly, is there anything like a regular Bob or Maritza could do to support these efforts, these advocacy efforts? Because this is our community and we want people to feel welcome here. So is there anything that just a regular old us off the streets can do?
The most meaningful way that I can think of for, a regular old person off the street to get involved is to actually come and do this work with us. We're recruiting volunteers to help us set up apartments, grocery shop, pick up people at the airport. Hopefully not people that we didn't know were coming, like the guy today, but people we have notifications about, and help us do this work. And so if you visit our website, iine.org, or you email us at volunteers with an S at iine.org, we can hook you up with that whole process and system, and we would love for people to help us resettle these Afghan evacuees.
Awesome. So that's iine.org. Amazing work as always. Thank you so much for coming on, Emma. We really appreciate it.
I love to be here with both of you.
Yes, and really the star of the show is Bob's socks. That's
Yeah, zoom in on the socks.
And thank you all for tuning in. This has been History and Lowell. Get out there and help your fellow human, because we're all human, right? So thank you all for being here.